My capabilities or God's capability? Should I plan what I'm going to do in any given day based on my capacity or God's capacity? Yes. Both have to be held in tension. And if that isn't obvious, then I encourage you to watch this video, because I'm telling you, there is a tension between the two. And if we ignore either one or the other, we will get it wrong. But when we hold them together, it's so dynamic. It will be so mind-blowing. In fact, that you might look like you're nuts if you're doing it the way that God intends. A year ago, February 2024, I was in a gathering with a group of folks in Dallas, Texas, that were all leaning hard into Jesus' John 17 prayer for unity. And in the introductions, we were asked to share not what God is doing through us, which is the way we normally talk, what's our job, what do we do, but what is God doing in us? And so my answer to that question was, well, God has healed my depression in the last year and a half. And so I have more energy, more time, more vision. I'm sleeping less, and I'm completely having to recalibrate how much I can put on my plate. So that's what God's doing in me, I said. And so the guy that called the gathering later the next day said, so he and I were just talking, and he says, so tell me how you decide what you're going to say yes to and what you aren't. And I said, well, if it fits my vision and my mission and my capacity and my strength, if it fits all those things, if it's something that aligns perfectly with the bullseye of what God has called me to do, then I say yes. Or I, at the very least, knock on the door and see if it opens. And he just looked at me and laughed and said, I think you're going to want a better strategy than that. And so basically his question was, let God help. Instead of just figuring it out yourself, let God help. And so I've been on that journey now for over a year. And frankly, when people ask, it's probably my single biggest growing edge, is this exact question. How do I decide what matches my capabilities versus what matches God's capabilities? Because see, God commanded us to rest. In fact, in the Old Testament, even in the New Testament with Jesus, most of his conflict with the religious leaders was over the command to observe the Sabbath, to rest, because our capabilities, our capacity is limited. We can't do everything. God's capacity is totally unlimited. He can do everything. He can speak the world into existence with his mouth. So he has no limits. He can do anything, but we can't. And so there's a tension. And so the command to rest is like a big deal in the Bible. You wouldn't think that we'd have to be commanded that often to rest, to take that seriously, but we're limited. We can't do everything. And so they just completely misunderstood that, and it was a major source of tension in the Gospels. Well, that, of course, matters. But again, the question is, what's God asking me to do? So I've been working really hard on that over the last year. In fact, I've gotten some other people to pray with me when I get invitations. Lord, is this a yes? Is this for me now? Is this for me later? Or is this for somebody else? Those are the questions that I ask or try to ask on a regular basis. Well, I don't always remember to ask. And so in the fall, there was this event, and it sounded like something that would make sense for me to do. And so I said yes. I didn't pray about it. I didn't talk about it. I just said yes. But as the evening got closer, and it wasn't a big time commitment, it was a couple hours in the evening. But as it got closer, I'm like, oh, I did it again. I said yes based on my capacity, what I wanted to do, and I didn't even check in with you, Lord. I'm so sorry. Should I cancel? No. So I show up. And the whole time I'm there, I was asked not to have anything to offer, but just to have a table where I was sharing what I wanted to, or what God's doing through J17 Ministries. And the whole time I'm there was like one person the entire evening that came over, and I could tell it was a pity visit to the table. They weren't interested, but they felt bad for me sitting there all by myself. So at the end of the evening, the whole time I'm like, oh, I missed it again. I wasted an evening. I shouldn't have been here. And so the next morning, in my time with the Lord, I'm journaling and I'm praying and I'm like, God, I did it again. I'm sorry. How do I get better at this? And so I felt like the Lord said, well, list out what was the fruit from last night. And the fruit was I had like 3 conversations with people that I already know that are already involved in the ministry. And then I felt like the Lord said, is that enough fruit? And I thought about it and I'm like, well, if that's where I was supposed to be, then sure, that's enough fruit. And it just helped me realize there's only one question that matters. Is this something God wants me to do or not? If I try to figure it out on any other basis, there's a good chance I'll get it wrong. And it turned out on that one that it was such a crazy supernatural way that God used that event in ways that actually make no sense to introduce us to a person that was going to play a significant role for us. And so, yeah, that's plenty of fruit if it's the fruit that God wants. But it's not nearly enough fruit if it's based on what I'm looking at. So this is a common theme in the Bible. This tension between what are we capable of and what is God capable of shows up all over the place. So there's a guy that is told by the Lord he's going to be the father of many nations. And the problem is he's the father of 0. And he's now 75 years old. And his wife is 65 years old. What's his capability? About 0. But God says, no, it's coming through you. And he has to wait 24 more years. God's capability or our capability? Well, God clearly trumps that because God said, this is what I want to have happen. Another situation where there's a guy who's actually a refugee and he's got a pretty significant anger problem. And so he's like hiding out for 40 years because he killed a guy. He's guilty. And God says, I want you to go back and rescue my people. That would be Moses. And the whole conversation is just hilarious because Moses is like, I don't have the capability to do that. And he gives one excuse after the other. And he was right in every case, except that God said, I'll be with you. That's really all you need to know. There's another story. In this case, I'll tell you his name right up front. His name is Gideon. And so he was a little guy from a little tribe, and he had a massive self-esteem issue. God says, I'm calling you to rescue the whole nation of Israel. And he's like, well, that's ridiculous. And so they go back and forth. But he eventually, through many tests, says, okay, God's asking me to do this. So he gets an army together and God's like, yeah, you got way too many people. And so he whittles it down and he's like, no, you still got way too many people. And it gets down to the point where no military advisor on the planet would ever say, this is a good idea. But God says, yeah, that's about right. 300. That should be plenty to tackle the countless hordes of people because, and here's the only thing that matters, I will be in it. And so, again, if those aren't held in tension, we get the wrong answer. Well, those are 3 Old Testament stories. How about over in the New Testament? There's a huge crowd of people, and they've been listening to Jesus for a long time when they're getting hungry, and Jesus, he's just playing with them. he like says, yeah, you guys should give him something to eat. And they're like, are you kidding? It would take like a year's worth of wages to feed this crowd. And he's like, well, tell me what you have. And so they ask around and they come up with 5 loaves and 2 fish. Is that enough? Not a chance. Unless God says, yeah, I can use that. And then he does, and he multiplies it, And here's how crazy this stuff is. It starts with 5 loaves and 2 fish. After feeding about 10,000 people, they pick up 12 baskets of leftovers. There's like 100 times more leftovers than there was in the original meal. When God is in it, he's limitless. And so if the only thing that matters is he the one telling us to do it? Now, here's how it goes the other direction. So Peter was one of Jesus' followers, and he had a high view of his own capabilities. And he's like, oh, Jesus, you can count on me. If you can't count on anybody else, you know you can count on me. And Jesus is like, oh, really? Yeah, well, tonight, here's what's going to happen. And so he was looking at his own capability, not in the context of God's capability at all. He was relying on his own strength, and he totally flamed out. Except that then God restored him and used him as a powerful leader. Now, how about Paul? Paul was extremely capable. He had had lots of planning, lots of training. He had been well educated. He loved God. He was zealous for the Lord. He would do anything, and he did. Problem is, he had it all wrong. And so he's actually murdering the followers of Jesus. And yet God says, I want you. I'm going to help you switch sides, and I'm going to use you to spread the good news of who Jesus is and how much better life is in his name to the rest of the world. I'm going to use you to do that. And he did. See, if we look at what our capabilities are and don't pay any attention to what God's capabilities are, then we can either be like Peter or we can be like Gideon, and in both cases, we'll get it wrong. We can look at what we can do and way overestimate it and burn out, and I know a little bit about that because I did that. So yeah, if we do everything that we want to do, even if it's a good thing, even if it fits our vision, mission, capacity, but we do it because we want to, the invitation is there, and we just keep saying yes to all that stuff, a present struggle of mine, then we can absolutely burn out and flame out, and it can be an epic train wreck. But we can go the other direction and say, I can't do that. Lord, that's ridiculous. There's no possibility that I could make that happen. I don't have this, that, or that. And we forget that God can multiply time. He does it all the time. He can multiply space. He did it in this house that we're in right now. Val's like, there's no way all the stuff that we have is going to fit. And it's fit, and we have extra space. It's kind of like the 5 loaves and 2 fishes. He can multiply energy. He can multiply everything because he has no limits. But those two have to be kept in tension. God, is this something you are asking me to do? Is this your invitation? Is this your call? And if the answer is yes, then we may look crazy, but it'll work out. And if the answer is no, we may look crazy because it makes so much sense, except it doesn't to the Lord. And that's the only thing that matters. Thanks for watching. I hope that you'll subscribe. I hope you'll click like, and I hope you'll share it with somebody else who might be entertained by some of my struggles. Next week, we want to talk about, are we all children of God? See, that's actually a both and question, and it's not intuitively obvious. So we'll take a look at that next week. Thanks for watching.